All right. I don't talk about the Claremont Institute enough. I think it is a great think tank. Their Claremont Review of Books is one of my favorite journals. I don't know what to call it. It's not really a magazine because it comes on newspaper paper, but it really is a wonderful journal of review of books and just politics in general, very deep stuff. But they are battlers of the administrative state. And one of the great things about Brett Kavanaugh is he has come out and said that the rule of unelected administrative bodies is not in the Constitution. This Chevron law, they call it. Well, we'll talk all about this with Matthew Peterson, because Matthew Peterson is the Vice President of Education at the Claremont Institute. He directs the Institute's fellowship programs, which educate each rising generation of leaders dedicated to constitutional government. He just completed 2 weeks of intensive seminars with the impressive 2018 Publius Fellows. I know some of those guys. It really is a great program. Here is Matthew Peterson from the Claremont Institute talking about the administrative state. Matthew Peterson, thank you very much for coming on today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to talk to you. Before I begin to ask you questions, I want to say that one of my gripes against conservatives is they give very boring names to things. The left always knows to make things sound scary. So they say like racial profiling to describe police work, or objectifying women to describe the fact that men like to look at women. But we come up with the administrative state, which is very hard even to understand what it means. So let me begin there. In words of one syllable, describe to people what exactly the administrative state is.
Sure. First, let me just agree with what you said. I mean, deep state is much better.
Much better.
Deep state is scary, and it signifies. It's a much better signifier. The administrative state, very simply, consists in all the departments and agencies that are ostensibly, technically, underneath the President of the United States. So the administrative state is really just a collection, a large collection, a growing collection of federal agencies and departments, from the EPA to the IRS, the Social Security Administration, the alphabet soup of modern life, all these federal agencies and departments. That's really what the word refers to.
So why should we fear and hate it, as indeed I do?
Therein lies a tale. I mean, I think most people naturally, many Americans are suspicious. We know this from polling and our experience in our own lives of the administrative state, of this colossus, this confusing morass of bureaucracy. So the reason I think you should fear it, though, is not. It doesn't have anything to do with numbers or statistics or the kind of buzzwords that experts use. The reason we should fear it is because it's grown into a thing that keeps on growing, that seemingly can't be stopped, and that violates the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. And that, I think, is the important thing for everyone listening to understand. We need to be able to articulate how the administrative state deviates from the principles of American constitutionalism and government.
Well, okay, how does it? Why does it do it specifically?
Well, here we have to understand something about the founding itself and our system of government. So from the very beginning, we had this notion of separation of powers, right? And the idea wasn't that you separate power for its own sake. You separate power just to, throw a wrench in the machine so government isn't efficient. The idea was you separate certain kinds of power because different kinds of power have a different kind of character. So, and if you combine different kinds of power, it's tyrannical. Everyone knows this from watching Westerns, if anyone still watches Westerns, which I hope they do. We all know that judge, jury, and executioner is a problem, right? We don't want the judge to be the judge, jury, and executioner. Why? Because we're combining different kinds of power into one man in a way that gives that person tyrannical control over our lives. So, of course, we have three branches of government: a judiciary, an executive, and a Congress. Congress is supposed to make the law, and Congress creates these agencies and departments that the executive directs executing the law, and the judges then judge disputes concerning the law. Well, the problem with the administrative state is Congress now has devolved power, has given power to these agencies underneath the president. But they're not really underneath the president in the sense that the president can fire whoever he wants. It's enormously hard to fire federal employees, as everyone kind of sort of knows, as President Trump has been talking about. you can't fire them. So the executive really isn't in charge. They last from generation to generation, from administration to administration. Most people in the large pyramid stay there. So they're not really being controlled by the executive. Second, Congress is supposed to oversee them. Congress is supposed to make sure they're doing a good job. And as we see lately, Congress isn't overseeing them very well. Congress gives away its power to these agencies, and Congress is supposed to make the law. But when Congress has created these agencies over the last 100 years, it allows the agencies themselves to make law in the form of regulation. And every year, Federal Register comes out. There's hundreds of thousands of pages of regulation of essentially law with force behind it that these agencies are creating without any sort of political oversight from Congress. So right there you have, in a nutshell, I think, the problem of separation of powers, right? The administrative agencies have combined the powers of Congress and the executive without political oversight and without being beholden to the people.
Okay, that is a very clear explanation of what's happening. Give me a specific example of how, it doesn't have to be a real thing, but how this could play out in a person's life.
Well, I mean, there's so many different kinds of examples. Take one from today's headlines that I rather like. Many, I'm sure, in the audience remember when Obama was president. It turned out that the IRS was targeting organizations that they deemed to be on the right. They were essentially treating them unfairly, right, when it comes to taxation and auditing them and going after them in all kinds of ways. Well, that impacted a lot of people's lives. I've talked to people who ran nonprofits during that time who had to deal with all kinds of problems because the IRS made their lives miserable. Now, when you think about this was exposed over time, right? Congress is in charge of the IRS. Did Lois Lerner, did these people get in trouble for what they did? I mean, Congress should be able to turn around and say, we make the laws, we oversee the IRS. We think you were acting unfairly, unjustly, and you helped, you screwed with these people's lives. But what really happened from that? Who was accountable, right? And you see this now in, of course, the really controversial stuff when it comes to the FBI and the Russian collusion and, all this stuff that's in the news, right? What you see is federal agencies, parts of the administrative state, looking over to Congress and saying, maybe kind of we'll sort of get you the documents you want. What you see is in the text messages between these people, a disdain, right, for the power of Congress to oversee them. And many people's lives have been impacted, throughout. We've seen this. They're in the headlines today. And
if you get abused by this state, by one of these agencies, and you want to appeal, you have to appeal to the agency, don't you?
Yeah, that's a tremendous problem. There's a whole administrative law system, right, a kind of shadow court system that deals with administrative law. There's administrative law judges. When they change their regulations, there is a process that they go through, and you can complain or say you think they should change the regulation this way and that way. But you really don't have a lot of say. They listen. They'll publish what they want in the Federal Register from those proceedings. And if you really want to, let's say you feel like you need to go to court, you're facing a colossus. I mean, you're facing a very, very powerful entity that, again, it needs to be under political control. The real secret here to controlling the administrative state or railing it back is making sure that elected officials have say and power over it.
I keep hearing about the Chevron decision at the Supreme Court. Is that part of this? Is that part of the problem?
Yeah. So Chevron, I mean, the idea there was that that the courts should defer to the administrative agencies when they do what they want to do. And what we're seeing now, I think, is hopeful. I mean, if we're going to turn this around, we need people in the courts who are willing, just like Congress needs to be willing, to really shake up the administrative state, to shake up these agencies and say, hey, we're going to hold you accountable. You can't just do what you want according to your own regulations. We're not going to defer to you anymore. So one of the hopeful things for people on the right who want this solve this problem is that we do have a rising generation, a rising tide of people in the courts who who are going to be, I think, increasingly are being put into place by the president. Now, I think what's essential also to realize, though, is that the reason we have some of these people who will help hold the administrative state accountable in the courts is because of generations of really conservative scholarship and action that was smart, that was organized, and that looked back to find out what's the real problem. And that's at the Claremont Institute, that's 40 years of scholarship. I mean, we pride ourselves in kind of pioneering the notion of the progressives, the administrative state, and explaining how they arose and what the problem is. And organizations like us, I think we really spearheaded this in many ways in scholarship. But then you go out to people and start educating them, and then you have a whole class of new leaders who can actually tackle the problem. Education here is an enormous problem for us, right, in solving all of this, because in most schools you'd be taught, if you're a lawyer, that the administrative state is A-OK. It's the evolution, it's progress, right? It's evolutionary progress. It's all good.
It is one of the things that I find very frustrating. It is great to have you come on and speak about this as clearly as you are, because it obviously is a complicated subject, but just getting to the basics of how these people can come in and really ruin people's lives. And Bret Stephens, the columnist, once wrote that the press doesn't understand this because we're protected by the First Amendment. But you're not protected if you're running a lumber yard or just a business somewhere, and that's where they get you. Recently, Scott Pruitt had to resign from the EPA, and I understand enough journalists I trust have said that Pruitt was being a little careless with his ethical decisions, but it did still seem like a kind of assassination to me. How hard is it going to be to go into an organization like the EPA, which has been sanctified by the left, and really reform it?
It's obviously it's very difficult, right? You've seen this, your whole life. I mean, every time there's everyone likes to say they're going to reform things, they're going to make it more efficient, and when you try to do that in any way whatsoever, you're fighting more than City Hall.
Yeah.
You're fighting the imperial city. So in Pruitt's case, look, I don't know the details about I'm not gonna. He resigned, but let me say, there are certainly cases I'm aware of where people were going to be appointed recently to be put in charge of these agencies. And the agency's own lawyers, their counsel, did everything they could, right? Did everything they could to kick up the dust and to screw over whoever was trying to come in. And you have to understand, I mean, there's an enormous amount of power here, and they live in symbiosis. They live in a symbiotic relationship with Congress, and that's what's unnatural. That's what we need to change. When Congress holds them to account, they should be able to say, look, we control your budget. You better come in here and tell us, Congress should put the fear of God into these departments and agencies to hold them accountable. But they're not afraid anymore, partly because Congress doesn't even pass a budget, right? I mean, we're just continuing appropriations, but also because Congress now, in many ways, is a creature of the administrative state, and that's an enormous problem. But there's a deeper, I guess, issue here, and it really is a way of simplifying the issue, all these particulars that we talk about. And that is to understand that the progressives really started this around the turn of the last century. And when the administrative state was created, the people who created it, including, say, Woodrow Wilson, right, who's president 2 terms, president of Princeton University, they explicitly said the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is outdated. We need a number of experts who are rational, right, in the sense that they're not political. They're going to have expert knowledge, and we're going to put them in charge of all this change happening in modern times, and they're going to make things go smoothly. And they specifically said this. Wilson said progress. He loved that word. No word, he said, comes more often or more naturally to the lips of modern man. And everyone else in the past, they didn't think or talk about progress. They looked to the past. But Wilson said, we think of the future, not the past, as the more glorious time in comparison with which the present is nothing. So in order to attain this glorious future, we need to put up all these experts, and PhDs were just coming into American society at the time. The first research universities after the Civil War, Johns Hopkins is is the first of them. They model the German Research University. And the idea is we're going to have all these PhDs, shudder, right? Red flag, PhDs and lawyers, right? I mean, Lincoln didn't go to law school, right? He just went to a panel and proved he knew stuff about law from apprenticeship. We're going to professionalize these expert class. And what you see is over the last century, that expert class being put into place through the administrative state. So the problem here is that we've got 100 years or more of education telling American society that we need these credentialed experts who are objective, right? They're not political. They don't get into these debates about what's just and unjust. They're just going to go in a programmatic, procedural way and solve our problems. And of course, as we all know, they haven't done a very good job.
It doesn't work out that way. I'm running out of time, but I want to ask you the last question. Trump seems to me to have done a really good job in rolling back specific regulations or the numbers of regulations. But has he made a dent in the state itself? Has he done anything to reform the system? And is there anything you'd like to see him do?
Well, anything. I mean, this is turning around an aircraft carrier, right? This is moving an iceberg. It's going to take time. So whatever he does, getting rid of regulations is certainly good. That's been great. But this is a long-term project. So number one, we have to keep up with the judges. We need judges, and this they've done a fantastic job of. The president has done a fantastic job of this. We're going to put in judges who will last for a long time and who will help roll things back from the judiciary side. The second thing is more complicated. We need Congress to energize itself. We need Congress to come back to life. We need a new class of congressional leaders who don't look to the president and they don't look to the courts. They look to themselves to legislate and to hold these agencies and departments accountable. And that, I think, is something that the president is doing in many ways. They're frustrated because many times they're complaining they don't know where he stands, right? They have to stand up for themselves. He's telling them to legislate, God forbid. And that's making them very nervous, but that's a good thing long term. And I think a lot of people are getting out because they're frustrated with the situation. Things are changing, and that's fine. But we're going to need to elect and look for a new class of congressional leaders who understands this problem and are dedicated to fixing it.
Really good explanation. Matthew Peterson, thank you very much. The Claremont Institute, one of my favorite think tanks. Their review is one of my favorite magazines. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back and talk again.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back.